3 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking for this week. The first guy, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So Bass so far, he's picked up where he left off last season, and he's had two good performances. Week 1 at the Rams, 8 fantasy points, and Week 2 versus the Tennessee Titans, double digits in that one with 12 fantasy points. And right here, Week 3 in Miami, probably going to be a sunny day, probably going to be nice out. And this Miami defense, I know last week they got torched by Lamar Jackson and that Baltimore Raven offense, but right here in this one, I think as a home game in division rivals here in the AFC East, Bass is going to get a few field goal opportunities, more than just the Bills going up and down the field and scoring a ton of touchdowns. And like I said, Bass is on one of the best teams in the league. They're going to get in the opportunities early and often. And this week here, I got him number 1. Number 2, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. Evan McPherson, he's off to a pretty decent start in the early going here, even though I know in real life he missed a couple field goals in Week 1 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But last week he bounced back at the Dallas Cowboys with 13 fantasy points, 240 to 49-yard hits, and hit a 50-plus yarder in that one. So Week 3 here at the New York Jets, this is a must-win game. I know it's only Game 3 of the season here for the Cincinnati Bengals, but they got to get things going quickly before it's too late this season, because if you start 0-3, the chances of you making the playoffs isn't that good. So Evan McPherson, he's been a good kicker since his rookie year last year, and I think he's going to continue in this one once again, where I could see him easily scoring double digits at the New York Jets. And this Bengal offense, there's no excuse if they're not in the red zone a lot in this ball game and getting McPherson opportunities. Number 3, Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens. So Justin Tucker, we know he's one of the best kickers of all time here. And so far, he's had 2 pretty good fantasy days. Week 1 at the Jets, 6 fantasy points. And last week in that tough loss versus Miami, 10 fantasy points. So right here, Week 3 in New England, this New England Patriot defense, but is a bend but don't break type of defense here, where I think the Ravens are going to settle for at least 2 or 3 field goals and a couple extra points in this one. So as long as Tucker gets opportunities, he's most likely going to hit it through the uprights, where last week he had 5 extra points and hit a 50-plus yarder in that ball game. And I could see a similar type of thing, anywhere from 9-10 fantasy points at least here for Justin Tucker. And I like him in number 3. Number 4, Matt Gay, Angeles Rams. So Matt Gay and the Rams here have a good matchup going into Arizona. The 3rd indoor game of the season already for Gay and this Ram team here. And that's what's good about playing in West. A lot of indoor games, and obviously 8 to 9 home games per year for Matt Gay. So Week 1 versus Buffalo, 6 fantasy points with a 50-plus yarder and an extra point. And Week 2 versus Atlanta, 20-plus yarder and 4 extra points in that one. So Week 3 here at Arizona, usually these both teams, they have shootouts for the most part. And I think in this one, we're going to see this one in the mid-20s to low 30s between these two teams. And that means a lot of field goal opportunities here for Matt Gay and some extra point opportunities. And this Arizona defense really hasn't stopped anyone so far in the early going. The Chiefs took care of business with them in Week 1. And then Week 2, the Raiders got off to a quick start, but just couldn't finish the deal. But they still scored 23 points. But then this Arizona offense woke up and got them the victory. But anyway, here, Matt Gay, I think he could get anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points this week. And I got him in number 4. Number 5, Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Carlson last season really emerged as one of the top kickers in fantasy football. And so far this year, he's picked up where he left off. Week 1 at the Chargers, 20 to a 29-yarder, a 50-plus yarder, and an extra point. And then Week 2 versus Arizona, 13 fantasy points, a 20 to a 29-yarder, 30 to 39-yarder, a 50-plus yarder, and 2 extra points. So Week 3 here, pretty good matchup for this Raider offense at the Tennessee Titans. Right here, this Titan team off to a slow start as well at 0-2, and something's got to give between these two teams here. And Daniel Carlson's an accurate kicker. I know this one's obviously not an indoor game, where the first 2 ball games of the season for him were indoors, but I don't think it's going to be bad weather over there in Tennessee. And like I said, the Raiders, they got to get off to a good start in this ball game and hold the lead after blowing last week's ball game versus the Arizona Cardinals. But Daniel Carlson, each and every week, he's good for pretty much 8 to 10 fantasy points. And this week, I got him in number 5. Number 6, Greg Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings. So on Monday Night Football in Week 2 was just an off week in general for this Viking team. And they had opportunities. They just couldn't finish them. Like a pick within the 20-yard line. Then he throws an into his Kirk Cousins. And then a couple other drives. They couldn't get anything going with decent field position. So last week, was definitely a down week 1 fantasy point at Philly, but it was fluky, in my opinion, for Joseph. Week 1, he had a great ball game with 13 fantasy points, 2 20 to 29 yarders, 50-plus yarder, and 2 extra points. In week 3 here, I definitely could see this ball game being a mini shootout between division rivals, the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. And right here, this Lion team, they put points on the board so far in the early going. Week 1, 35, and week 2, 36. So this offense is moving the ball well. Jared Goff's got these guys going. Him and Mama St. Brown and DeAndre Swift really putting in work right now. And I think this ball game, we're going to see these teams go up and down the field, especially the Vikings are going to bounce back. And let's be honest, Kirk Cousins is way better at home than he is on the road. And I think Greg Joseph, another indoor game obviously here at a home game, he's going to have a good one in this one. And I got him in number 6. Number 7, Ryan Succop of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Ryan Succop, a guy not many people paying attention to in fantasy football in the first couple weeks, but now he got added in a decent amount of fantasy leagues, owned in 70% of leagues. Week 1 at Dallas, 15 fantasy points, a 20 to a 29 yarder, a 30 39 yarder, and 240 to 49 yarders with an extra point. And week 2 at New Orleans, 240 to 49 yard shots and 2 extra points. And right here, week 3 versus the Green Bay Packers, this ball game, it could be another struggle for this Tampa Bay offense, especially if Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, and suspension be out of this ball game, and Brady's top 2 wide receivers, then if all those guys are out, is going to be Rashad Perriman, Russell Gage, Cole Beasley, and Scotty Miller, which obviously is some group of guys there as backups, not as guys you want to start in your starting lineup. But anyway, right here, I think they're going to have to settle for field goals. And this offense just hasn't been in sync the first 2 weeks of the season. And the funny thing is, they're still 2-0, this Buck team. So once they get rolling on full capacity on the offensive side of things, watch out. But anyway, Ryan Succop, I think he's good for 8 to 10 fantasy points in this one. And he'll get a few opportunities. Number 8, Dustin Hopkins of the Los Angeles Chargers. I had him as a kicker to start this week in my video, and I think Hopkins has a good ball game once again in this one, and he's still available in over 50% of fantasy leagues. Here's Hopkins. So week 1 versus the Raiders, 40 to a 49 yarder with 3 extra points, and then last week at the Chiefs in week 2, a 30 39 yarder with 3 extra points. So week 3 here, I like a lot of Chargers this week to have great ball games versus Jacksonville Jaguar defense. I know the Jaguars shut out the Colts, but Justin Herbert at this point of his career is way better than Matt Ryan. And they got more weapons as well. Last week, Matt Ryan had nobody at the receiver position. Paris Campbell and Doolin were his 2 starting wide receivers. And Jonathan Taylor, the game plan was to just shut him down and have him try to beat him. But anyway here, this Charger offense is going to get in the red zone early and often. Dustin Hopkins, he's been a good find for them after the Commanders cut him loose last season. And the Chargers, we've known they've had kicking problems for seasons, but I think Hopkins is finally a kicker that's come in over here, playing good football, and a guy you can count on to hit big field goals. And I think this week with a good matchup and a home game back indoors, he has another good one this week, and I got him in at number 8. Number 9, Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. Elliott available widely in over 60% of fantasy leagues here. So right now, Elliott, first 2 weeks of the season, pretty good. Week 1 at Detroit, 20 to a 29 yarder, 5 extra points. In week 2 versus Minnesota, 30 to a 39 yarder with 3 extra points, even though he had a blocked field goal attempt on him. But week 3 here, Washington, the Commanders, they give up a lot of points so far. 58 points given up in the first 2 games of the season here. And this Philadelphia Eagle team trying to go 3-0 and really try making an impact here in the NFC East. And I like a lot of Eagles in this one. I see this ball game either being a blowout by the Eagles or a close shootout coming down to the wire. But anyway, this Eagle team, we saw what they did versus Minnesota in week 2. They got in the red zone early and often, scored touchdowns early and often, and that bodes well for Jake Elliott in this one. So I think he has a top 10 performance, and I got him in 9. Number 10, Young Hoku of the Atlanta Falcons. So Young Hoku, he's back to what he was doing a couple seasons ago, where he was a top 5 scorer in fantasy points at kicking. And believe it or not, this Atlanta offense has been better than I thought was going to be so far in the early going. Week 1 versus the Saints, 19 fantasy points for Koo, 20 to a 29 yarder, 40 49 yarder, 2 50-plus yarders, 2 extra points. And then last week at the Rams, a 20 to a 29 yarder and 2 extra points. So a little bit of an off game. But right here, week 3 at the Seattle Seahawks, I could see this ball game being a tight, contested game by both teams, and a game where both field goal kickers get a few opportunities. With that 12th man, especially over there in Seattle, it's tough to score touchdowns and get the job done in the red zone. We saw it in week 1 with Denver fumbling twice within the 2-yard line. So right here, I think the Falcons, they'll get a few opportunities here for young Hoku. And they're the type of offense that could drive the football down but not finish the drives at times here, where Marcus Mariota is their quarterback. So right here, as the 10th kicker this week, I think Koo has a good ball game and is a safe start this week. Number 11, Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos. So Brandon McManus, so far, he's played great in the first 2 weeks of the season. Week 1 in Seattle, 11 fantasy points, 20 to a 29-yarder, 30 to a 39-yarder, 40, 49-yard range, and an extra point. And then week 2 versus Houston, 220 to 29-yarder ranges, and that good 50-plus yarder with an extra points. It seems like every home game for this Bronco team, he puts a 50-yarder through the uprights. And right here on Sunday Night Football versus San Francisco 49ers here, it's a ball game in Denver once again. So this Niner team, good defense. Last week shut out the Seattle offense. And I think this week here they can hold this struggling Bronco offense down. And that just means field goal opportunities, in my opinion, here for Brandon McManus. If it's within 50, 55 yards here, he's going to get opportunities. It's another home game, like I said. And I think this week here, Brandon McManus has another good game. And I got him at number 11. I don't know if he's going to have double digits, but anywhere from 6 to 8 fantasy points is definitely possible. And the 12th and final kicker I'm ranking this week here is Graham Gano with the New York Giants. So Graham Gano last week with a performance with 17 fantasy points versus former team, the Carolina Panthers. Week 1 in Tennessee, I know he didn't do anything. Only 1 extra point in that ball game. But week 2 versus Carolina, 230 to 39 yarders, 250 to 50-plus yarders, and an extra point. In week 3 here versus NFC East rival, the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football. I think Graham Gano is going to get opportunities. And this Dallas Cowboy defense is a bend but don't break type of defense early in the season, where field goal kickers have had good success. Ryan Succop in week 1 versus the Cowboys, 15 fantasy points. And then in week 2, Evan McPherson with 13. So right here, Graham Gano this week here, I think he could have a good ball game. And he's a kicker widely available in 95% of fantasy leagues. So that's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking here for week 3 of the fantasy football season.